So today we're going to talk about the problematics of human self-sufficiency and tragedy in Shakespeare. I think Coriolanus is perhaps the best play for revealing that core aspect of Shakespearean tragedy. This play is a remarkable intellectual achievement. It's not Shakespeare's greatest play by any means. I'm not going to argue for that. But in a certain way, it's his most remarkable intellectual achievement in that it required such a leap of imagination to create this play. Here's Shakespeare living under a Christian monarchy, and he thinks himself back into a pagan republic. In a way, his achievement doesn't look so impressive because he taught us what pagan republics are like, and so we now know. But it's because of him that we do know them. And I've tried to show you how well he understands the Republican regime. He knows what a consul is. He knows what a tribune is. As far as I can tell, he knows what an aedile is. And I don't know what an aedile is. But now he got a lot of this from reading Plutarch. These names, these terms appear there. But it's still pretty impressive how he thinks it through. And above all, he does understand how a pagan community differs. And it's really important to this play that the Rome of Coriolanus is a profoundly pagan community, and by that I especially mean no talk of an afterlife. When we talk about the focus on political life in this Roman Republic, a lot has to do with no distractions from an afterlife. When you get to Hamlet, you'll see how distracting the afterlife can be. But in this world, quite frankly, the only mode of immortality is political. For these, especially these heroes, if they want to live forever, it's going to be through fame. And that means by winning great battles and achieving great office. And that has a tremendous impact on getting them to focus on politics. They can't hope to make up for things in an afterlife. They can't seek out that form of immortality. We're going to see how that form of immortality begins to introduce itself as early as Antony and Cleopatra into the Roman world. But here, the Rome of Coriolanus really has a roof on it. It really has narrow horizons. The horizons are limited to this world and this life, and therefore those who desire to be immortal, and there is a human yearning for immortality, are going to do it through fame, through word of mouth. And that's very important for understanding why politics looms so large in the lives of these characters. Now, I want to go back to Aristotle a bit and talking about this idea of human self-sufficiency and show you why Aristotle can help us understand this play. Again, this is my gimmick in the course, trying to show you that knowing some political theory can help you understand Shakespeare. And by the same token, I think Shakespeare can make concrete for us some of the seemingly abstract ideas of political philosophy. It occurs to me I should say at some point something about Shakespeare's knowledge of this material. Shakespeare was not a great classical scholar, but for example, there are several Shakespeare scholars who think that Shakespeare was familiar with Aristotle's politics. There was an English translation of it, which I think came out in 1598. And so he could actually have read it. In any case, his education, such as it was steeped in the ancient world. Ben Jonson, his great competitor, famously said of Shakespeare that he had little Latin and less Greek. But that's a statement coming from one of the finest classical scholars of the age. And for Jonson to say that means that Shakespeare had a little Latin and some Greek too, which is pretty impressive. Now, Shakespeare, as far as we know, never went to college. He only got as far as high school. We actually don't have his high school transcript, but we have a very good idea of what was taught in high schools in those days. And Shakespeare went to a good high school in Stratford. His father was a reasonably wealthy man, effectively the mayor of Stratford at one point. He was in the glove business, in the leather business. He made a lot of money. His son would have gotten decent schooling. And we do know what the curriculum in Elizabethan high school was like, and they mainly studied the Latin classics. Shakespeare presumably would have read Caesar's commentaries in Latin. He would have read Ovid in Latin, Virgil in Latin. Now, it's true that when you get to the Roman plays, you see, he didn't read Plutarch in Greek. He read Plutarch in an English translation. I'm going to show you sometime soon when we get to Julius Caesar where Shakespeare actually corrected a mistake in North's translation of Plutarch. Again, he, like many of us, he would use translations, but he had some familiarity with Latin and even with Greek, and there were signs that he might have read some Plato, and as I say, signs that he might have read some Aristotle. So without having to claim he was a great classical scholar, when he looked for knowledge, one of the places he would have turned was to the ancient Greeks, and especially the Romans. Some of his earliest plays, Titus Andronicus, reflects the influence of the Roman dramatist Seneca. Comedy of Errors is based on a comedy by the Roman dramatist Plautus, and so on. So it's not implausible that to make reference to the ancients with regard to Shakespeare. He even has a character mention Aristotle in his play Troilus and Cressida. So I was talking last time about Aristotle's notion of the polis, which is very important. You may notice from that that's the origin of our word politics. The book we called Aristotle's Politics is called Greek Ta Politica. It's the book about the polis. And it shows you to understand politics, you have to know something about what this polis was like. And I was talking about Aristotle's view of the polis in terms of the notion of human self-sufficiency, that the polis, in effect, is the unit of human self-sufficiency. It's the critical mass of human beings you need to be able to fulfill all the human needs. It's hard for us to get back to a sense of this ideal of self-sufficiency in the ancient cities. I can maybe make it most concrete for you by reminding you these cities were walled. For us, a city is kind of a rough urban core that sprawls off into the suburbs. There was a much more definite sense of the city as a unit in the ancient world, largely because the cities, for defensive reasons, were in fact walled. But in some ways, that's very symbolic of what the polis is. It sets itself out as this unit of self-sufficiency. Now, when we think of self-sufficiency, we think mainly of food. And indeed, there's a sense to that the polis is that community that has solved the basic problem of feeding its population. And that's what then liberates them to go off and do these other things. Now, I'm reading some stuff into Aristotle here, in some ways drawing upon Plato's Republic, but I do think that from Aristotle's point of view, the polis is that size community that allows for the division of labor. That is, we got enough food, so not everybody has to spend all their time raising food. So some people can start making shoes. Some people can be carpenters. Some people can be painters. And indeed, one way I like to think of it is to think of the relation of the theater to the city, because these ancient cities, particularly Athens, but even we now know from excavation Sparta, they had theaters. Now, nobody in his right mind would create a city to have theaters. But it is a funny thing that once you have a city, you can enjoy the luxury of a theater. Again, when you reach a certain level of what we would call economic development, and when a lot of the basic human needs are roughly satisfied, you can allow a few lazy people to sit around all day and just write plays and not have to work. This obviously was what was going on in Athens. And there it is, something that we think of as a peak of Athenian achievement. The Greek drama is a kind of byproduct of Athens as a city. Again, when people were living in caves and struggling just to feed themselves and just warring on each other. And that's the way Aristotle pictures the pre-political situation, because he in fact quotes a passage from Homer about the Cyclops when he's trying to illustrate the pre-political condition. You know, no time to sit down and write plays. Life is a little too intense. But this is what Aristotle means when he says the city comes into existence for mere life, but it exists for the sake of the good life, or to live well. Again, the city seems at first to be solving these problems of mere subsistence, but what it really allows is the fulfillment of human potential. That's why the city is so important to Aristotle. Again, when we're living in caves, when we're in isolated families, when we're in warring tribes, there's a lot of things we can't do because the pressure of necessity is so great. What the city does is to relieve the pressure of necessity and allow some people to have the luxury of what we would call creativity. And this is why the city is so important. It allows for the fuller fulfillment of human nature. For Aristotle, the nature of a thing is the perfection of the thing. So to understand human beings, you don't want just the average human being or human beings reduced to the most basic primitive level. You want to see human beings at their best. And Aristotle's point is you can only see that in the city. That there are all things that are part of being a human being that you can't even begin to achieve until you've achieved, again, what we would call a certain level of economic development. Vision of labor is a wonderful illustration of that. So Aristotle's famous statement about the city, and we're going to see this illustrated in Coriolanus, is a man without a city is either a beast or a god. More precisely, what Aristotle says is a man who by nature and not just by accident lived without a city would either be a beast or a god. Now let me unpack that. You know, Aristotle recognizes you might take a wrong turn on the road between Sparta and Athens and just get lost. But we're talking if you had a being by nature who didn't need to live in a city, Aristotle says that being would be necessarily lower or higher in the order of beings than a human being. That is, that a being who didn't need a city might not have that human potential that can flourish in the city. So you can picture someone who was mentally deficient, and he might not need a city because he can't write plays, he can't cobble shoes, he can't do, just deficient, he can't do these human things. On the other hand, maybe it would be a god. Someone who could do without a city might be someone beyond us, some being straight out of Star Trek, let's say, who's like a Greek god. And that's what Aristotle means by that the city defines the level and indeed the nature of humanity. It's that community which completes human beings, which allows them to develop their human potential. But also sets limits to them. Now, Aristotle is a really smart guy, and he's trying to figure, this is all in Book 1 of the Politics, he's trying to figure this out, and man is an animal who lives in the polis. And Aristotle really means animal there. He just uses the Greek word zoon for animal. We're animals, but we're a peculiar kind of animals who live in cities. And he contrasts us to bees and ants. That is, that there are other animals that live in communities. But Aristotle pinpoints the difference. Bees and ants don't argue over politics. They don't argue, hey, who should be queen? This queen is no good. We need a better queen. And here Aristotle ties our living in cities to our language. It's in the nature of human beings that they speak and they argue. The Greek word logos, which means speech, also means argument. And see, there are other beings that live in what might look like cities. large communities, ants and bees. I'm in the home of E.O. Wilson here, and we know that ants live in very complicated communities. But it's different from human communities because, as we would now say, ants live in communities by instinct, and human beings don't. It's what's very strange about the polis for Aristotle, that we live in the polis is natural. But which polis we live in is very artificial and depends upon the different conventions that a city enacts, the different laws it enacts. And so you could say it's natural for us to live in cities, but what precise form the city will take is a matter of convention and depends upon the individual city. That makes human life very complex, as Aristotle presents it. And indeed, in general, I'd like to say that his notion of the city is a kind of formula for tragedy. And in many ways is the formula for Greek tragedy, and I'd argue for Coriolanus, and in some ways for Shakespearean tragedy. What I mean by that is this. As human beings, we need these cities. We cannot become fully developed human beings without civic existence, without living together in cities, in part because otherwise we spend all our time getting our food. The city gives us that luxury, developing our potential. But the city also stands in the way. The city rules you. It makes laws. It has regulations. So you can't be a human being without a city. You can't be exactly the kind of human being you want with a city. The formula I'm trying to develop today is the city can't live with it, can't live without it. That's the formula for Coriolanus. It's the formula for all these tragic heroes. That they can't become the heroes they want to be without a city, and yet with a city, they can't become the kind of heroes they want to be. You could put it this way, and I think this is implicit in Aristotle's analysis. Human beings have a strange wholeness and partiality. In some ways, we are wholes, W-H-O-L-E-S. I mean, we each, have separate bodies, and we each think of ourselves as having separate identities. And yet what Aristotle shows, in some ways, you're part of a larger whole. You're part of a city. And you can't fulfill yourself without that. An isolated human being is either a beast or a god, either something lower or higher. Or Aristotle uses the image, an isolated human being would be like a single piece of a chess set. Now he uses some name for some Greek game, but you just take a piece of a chess set. What is its meaning in isolation? Now, because we know the whole game, we'd say, oh, the rook, that's this piece that moves along files. But no, in some ways, all those pieces of the chess set are parts. They're, you can see a whole rook and a whole knight and so on, but each one's part of a larger set. And in a way, that's the way Aristotle views human beings. We are wholes, but we're also parts of this polis. And now that's related to this eros-thumos problem we've been talking about. Eros reflects the human sense of partiality, that we aren't complete in ourselves. It's another reason why you don't see isolated human beings. They are attracted to each other, if for nothing other than sexual reasons. Thumos is that claim to be a whole, to be self-sufficient. And again, Shakespeare is so good at defining Coriolanus that way. The man who wants to stand alone as if a man were author of himself and knew no other kin. In some ways, that is the formula for the hero. It goes right back to Achilles, to the idea that there's this one guy who makes the difference and can win battles virtually single-handedly. So anyway, if you see, in some ways we have eros and thumos because of this peculiar character of human nature that we are always both parts and wholes, especially in relation to the city. And again, we can't fulfill ourselves without other human beings. On the other hand, other human beings constantly stand in the way of our fulfillment. So in fact, what we see in Coriolanus is, two related propositions. From the hero's point of view, the city, you can't live with it, you can't live without it. From the city's point of view, the hero, you can't live with him, you can't live without him. I mean, it's kind of a bad marriage here. This sense that these two entities, the city and the hero, they need each other, and yet they're in a profound tension. They get in each other's way. Okay, let me pause here. That's a lot to lay on you. Any questions about that? And as you think through this idea, man without a city is either a beast or a god. I'll even show you how that works out in Coriolanus. So let me now try to go through the play with these ideas in mind. From the point of view of the city, I think it's fairly clear what the issue is. These cities think of themselves as self-sufficient. They got their walls up. They're ready to go about their lives. They don't want to have to deal with Volskis or other strangers. We're Romans. We're all we need. And yet there's war. There's war between these seemingly self-sufficient cities, and their walls can't stand up. So they need heroes. And they deeply need heroes. It's particularly interesting. We have to, again, recapture something of the age here of what a military hero means in 500 BC. Shakespeare makes a point of suggesting this here. Page 76, for example. So it's Act 3, Scene 1, about line 221. When things are starting to go tense in the political negotiations here, Coriolanus draws his sword. No, I'll die here. There's some among you who have beheld me fighting. Come try upon yourselves what you have seen me. And one must picture the action coming to a dead standstill there, as all these plebeians freeze up and remember what a monster this guy is with his sword. Or then on page 77, line 242, on fair ground I could beat 40 of them. And I believe Shakespeare's suggesting that's about it. Coriolanus could handle 40 of them. Now, this is the best analogy for us would be samurai warriors. And if you've seen enough Kurosawa films, just set Toshiro Mifune going on, he can beat 40 of them at a time. It's a world of aristocratic warfare where sheer size and power, the mere ability to eat enough food to get into shape, really creates almost a physical difference between the orders of human beings here. That the great warrior patricians just look like something monstrous to the ordinary people. It's hard to find analogies to this in the modern world because technology has become the great equalizer in modern warfare. Give somebody an Uzi, and it doesn't matter how big the other guy is. Indeed, how many of you have seen the Ralph Fiennes film of Coriolanus? Well, that's good. I fortunately got a defective DVD copy and couldn't watch more than I could watch anyway. It just seemed awful to me because they updated to Bosnia, and they got automatic weapons. And, I'm sorry, if they got automatic weapons, Coriolanus loses his edge, if you'll pardon the pun. It's only in a world of swords that one human being can stand out this way. And again, Shakespeare emphasized it, the way the serving men among the Volskis react to Coriolanus on page 110. They're just frightened of him physically. It's the top of page 110, Act 4, Scene 5, line 157. What an arm he has! He turned me about with his finger and his thumb as one would set up a top. Now, in fact, they didn't regard him until found out who he is. But still, there is this sense of the physical presence. You guys ever stood next to a professional football lineman? Anybody here ever done that? It's kind of hard to believe they're of the same species. By some very strange accident, I once ended up at a hotel in Cleveland on the VIP floor by an accident of booking, and the Cleveland Browns were there for the Canton Hall of Fame game. And I remember going, when we were on the VIP floor, I'll explain from this one experience, I hasten to point out, you get this access to a free Sunday brunch. And so I walk in proudly, and there's the entire offensive line of the Cleveland Browns between me and the Locks. That's L-O-X. And I said, I'm never getting to that. Look at this thing. And they turned around, they said they just cracked up. And they parted, let me. But these people, it is hard to believe they're of the same species as you. They're gigantic. And then the funniest thing, they had bodyguards. Can you believe it? And you can't believe what the bodyguards were like. Anyway, but if you picture some athletes, you have some idea these ancient warriors were athletes, but really serious athletes who carried swords. And so there is a sense in this play that the ordinary people are in awe of these great warriors. Now, it's in part because they're just physically in awe of them, and they're so dangerous, but also because they need them. And so they're disposed, in fact, to honor them. This is a play about the popular element of the Roman regime, but I keep cautioning you not to think of this as democracy. The plebeians have a limited role in the regime, and in fact, they are aristocratically disposed in this sense. They pretty much accept the idea that these patricians are great men. There's some of them, like Menenius, who look kind of ordinary to them, and they fraternize with them. But they look at Coriolanus, and they're frightened. But he's their monster. And they love him for that. So anyway, you see the problem. One of the fundamental problems of the Republic is the disposition of the people to go over to the side of a great patrician, to worship him, to treat him as a god, and we'll see how that develops in the play. In Coriolanus, it looks as if the problem is that the plebeians don't sufficiently honor one of these great men, but in fact, you can see they're headed in that direction, and it's only Coriolanus's insistence on alienating them that prevents it. But you actually see what's going to be the problem when we get to Julius Caesar, that all along the weakness of this Roman Republic is actually the disposition of the people to be in awe of a great military leader. At a time when your whole city could be wiped out by foreign invaders, you really need a guy like this. On the other hand, what a pain. What a pain in the butt people like Coriolanus are. And that's what we see in the play. He's this great fighter, and you just love him when he's beating up on Volsces. But what happens when he starts beating up on you? And that's not a remote possibility. When he's out there saying, on fair ground, I could beat 40 of them, and has drawn his sword. So you see here what I mean. The hero can't live with him, can't live without him. These ancient cities needed men just like Coriolanus. They've set out to breed them. They've held up valor as the highest virtue for just this reason. And yet these guys are a real problem, especially during peacetime. This is a subject that fascinated Shakespeare. We'll see it come up again with Fortinbras and Hamlet, with Macbeth. See it with Othello. One of the most common tragic facts in Shakespeare is how a great hero adapts from war to peace. Richard III begins with a famous soliloquy about just about that subject. War and peace seem to demand very different qualities in your leaders. We'll see how Henry V negotiates that. It's something that Shakespeare is very aware of, and it goes to the heart of this problem of the hero. It's the problem of thumos. In some ways, thumos is the fundamental political problem. This is the political emotion, if you will. It's what makes people ambitious. It's what makes them fight. It's not easy to get people to walk off into battle when they may get killed. It takes something irrational to get. No rational computation will ever get you to walk into a battle. It takes that thumping chest. It takes that indignation, that anger at your enemy, the sense of pride. It takes an amazing degree of irrationality to be a good soldier. And so we've got this thumos in our chests. And the political problem is to channel that spiritedness, as I said, into public spiritedness. It is a very disruptive force. And it's all over Coriolanus. This is a play about anger, just as the Iliad is all about anger. Anger is my meat, says Volumnia. And, the political problem is taking, in a way, this most disruptive force and putting it to public uses. It's the force that makes people want to stand alone, be self-sufficient, and to draw that line and say, cross over that line, buddy. That's the last step you'll ever take. How do you build a community out of people with that attitude? It's the central problem of Plato's Republic. And it's where Socrates is having a dialogue with some very thumotic young men and trying to enlist their thumos in the service of philosophy. This is perhaps Shakespeare's play that most distills the problem of thumos as the political problem, and there's no easy solution to it. That's why there's such a potential for tragedy built into this. Let me pause here. Any questions thus far? Yes? Oh, no. How badly injured was really? All right. Well, that's what happens if you can't control your thumos. You end up in a British car park. All right. I'll have to check into that. Was he hunchbacked?
They said it had the same physical characteristics and like the same battle and stuff.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. So now let's talk about Coriolanus and his relation to the city. Because here again, this amazing claim this man makes that he wants to be as if a man were author of himself and knew no other kin. Now, there's several ways in which that is obviously untrue. In a way, it's what motivates him. That's his goal. Again and again, what he wants to be able to say, his dying words, "'Tis true that if you writ your annals true, I fluttered your Volskis in Corioli. Alone I did it." That resounds. The city banishes him. No, I banish you. It's like, I'm bigger than Rome because I'm the self-sufficient hero. Now, in a very obvious sense, no military leader can claim that because he needs an army. And in a very simple sense, Coriolanus does not quite win his battles single-handedly. He's able to go into Coriolis and survive for a few minutes single-handedly and inspire his troops to come really take the city. In fact, if you're a military leader, you don't win your battle single-handedly. And this is quite evident in Ophidius's complaint on page 35. This is Act 1, Scene 10, about line 5. "I would I were a Roman, for I cannot, being a Volsci, be that I am." There you see the problematic status of the hero. In a way, what Ophidius is trying to say is, I'm as great as Coriolanus. I ain't got the army behind it. I got these miserable Volskis. If I had the Romans fighting for him, I could win. Turns out that's not true, and Coriolanus is going to prove it. But you see the point here. Again, a very interesting revelation of the importance of the regime here. That what you are is not simply a factor of your sole identity as a human being, but whether you're a true Roman or a Volsky. And Coriolanus has a sense of this too. He doesn't want to think of the plebeians as Romans. This is on page 37. So Act 3, Scene 1, about line 236. I would they were barbarians as they are, though in Rome littered, not Romans as they are not, though calved in the porch of the Capitol. And again, Coriolanus is saying who you are is not a matter of simple birth. You're not a Roman just because you were born in Rome. Being a Roman is being a certain kind of person, and that's me. That's being a great warrior. In these circumstances, a military leader to claim he's self-sufficient is particularly weird. He needs the army behind him. He even needs his enemies. You see this on page 12, where this is Act 1, Scene 1, where he's thinking of Tullus Aufidius. This is about line 230. They have a leader, Tullus Aufidius, that will put you to it. I sin and envy his nobility, and were I anything but what I am, I would wish me only he. And again, this is a man who really wants to be who he is, but he can imagine only one other thing, and that's a rival general. You have fought together. Were half to half the world by the ears, and he upon my party. I'd revolt to make only my wars with him. He is a lion that I am proud to hunt. So he also needs enemies. And he needs enemies of a certain stature. What good is it being Coriolanus if there's nobody else around to fight of at least reasonably comparable stature? So it is odd. Coriolanus wants this ideal of human self-sufficiency, but he's chosen an odd career. Going into the military may not be the best way to achieve self-sufficiency. Although, I mean, in terms of literature, especially think of Homer's Iliad, this is the center of the traditional idea of the hero, the great soldier who single-handedly decides battles, and yet there's something strangely unself-sufficient about such a figure. And of course, it goes deeper to that than that, and that's where Shakespeare, as always, manifests his genius. And that is Coriolanus' need of the city because he needs praise. Again, he reeks of contempt for the city. He seems to turn his back on it gladly and say there is a world elsewhere and I banish you. And yet it turns out that he cannot be what he is without praise. And Shakespeare, to get to the real subtlety of that, shows you that Coriolanus affects a pose of not wanting praise. This is very important to him. He is very uncomfortable being praised. Look at page 31, for example. This is Act 1, Scene 9, about line 14. Pray now, no more. My mother, who has a charter to extol her blood, when she does praise me, grieves me. I have done as you have done. That's what I can. Induced as you have been. That's for my country. This man who seems so proud to us has these moments of self-deprecation where he denies that he even wants to be praised. Page 50 is another example. Bottom of page 50, so Act 2, Scene 2, about line 70. I had rather have my wounds to heal again than hear say how I got them. What's going on here? I'm saying that Coriolanus is someone who deeply needs praise, and yet he seems to deny that. Well, turn to page 33, and I think Shakespeare reveals the core of the issue here. This is Act 1, Scene 9, about line 50. You shout me forth in acclamations hyperbolical, as if I loved my little should be dieted in praises sauced with lies. This is the most revealing of his comments, because it shows that he really needs praise in his very act of denying it. He actually understands, at least at some level, the contradiction here. that how can he be self-sufficient if he needs people to praise him? So he really tries to deny that. He really acts as if he doesn't like to hear himself praised. And yet, what is driving him throughout the play? Even the plebeians, who are smarter than you might think, know this from the beginning. Page 4, Act 1, Scene 1, about line 40. Those soft-conscious men can be content to say it was for his country. He did it to please his mother and be partly proud, which he is even to the altitude of his virtue. And this logic is there from the very beginning of the play. Above all, he wishes to be praised by his mother. But he, in fact, deeply needs praise. What is he without praise? As I've said, his only source of immortality is word of mouth. It is people speaking of the great man whose immortal name, Coriolanus, will reflect a great achievement he did fighting on behalf of Rome. So he is a character who does need praise. And there's a very interesting exchange on page 48. So this is Act 2, Scene 2, starting about line 10. These are officers, and again, Shakespeare shows his respect for the intelligence of these relatively common people in Rome, starting about line 12. Therefore, for Coriolanus neither to care whether they love or hate him, manifests the true knowledge he has in the dispositions, and out of his noble carelessness lets them plainly see it. So this is the view that this is a man, Coriolanus, who is indifferent to praise. But the first officer notices something. It's very subtle. If he did not care whether he had their love or no, he waved indifferently twixt doing them neither good nor harm. But he seeks their hate with greater devotion than they can render it him, and leaves nothing undone that may fully discover him their opposite. Now, to seem to affect the malice and displeasure of the people is as bad as that which he dislikes to flatter them for their love. That's a very perceptive comment there. That if he really were indifferent to the people, he wouldn't even think about them. But why is he trying so hard to alienate them? Well, in fact, because he's trying to prove that he's above the need for praise. It's actually his secret dependence on the plebeians to honor him that makes him try to affect and despise them. Let me point out parenthetically, just as a matter of scholarship, that passage comes from Plutarch, but not from the life of Coriolanus. The parallel lives in Plutarch conclude with a separate section called the comparison, so that in this case, as I've told you before, the life of Coriolanus is paired with the Greek life of Alcibiades, and in the comparison of Coriolanus and Alcibiades, Plutarch makes just this point, because the Greeks always come out better. Plutarch's a Greek in these comparisons, these parallel lives. The Greeks always come out better. And he points out how affable Alcibiades was, this amazing man who was the leader of Athens and then was thrown out, became the leader of Sparta, then was thrown out, became the leader of Athens again. I mean, it's unparalleled in the history of political careers that anyone could be that affable or that persuasive. Plutarch faults Coriolanus for unnecessarily alienating people and offers Alcibiades a contrast and makes just that observation. I just mentioned this because, again, Shakespeare's reading, he's not a scholar, it's not vast, but it's more extensive than a lot of people acknowledge. And it does appear that he rummaged through Plutarch's lives and he was out to learn as much as he could from Plutarch. And that's one of the cleverest things he learned there. So what we see about Coriolanus is, in a way, his own fear of his need for praise. He is what Aristotle would call a great-souled man, the magnanimous man. He really is a remarkable man, but he doesn't feel comfortable with any reflections of neediness in him. So there's that wonderful moment after the battle with the Volsces when he remembers this Volsci that helped him. And he asks as a favor that this man should be set free, and then he forgets his name. Now, Shakespeare adds that detail, the incident of Coriolanus asking for the man to be freed is in Plutarch, but there's no business of his forgetting the name. But it's so telling about Coriolanus there that he doesn't really like to remember debts. He doesn't like to remember that he owes anybody anything. He is the man who would like to stand alone as if a man were author himself and knew no other kin. And this is why he moves in this inhuman direction in the play. And it's a real test here of human self-sufficiency. Here's a guy who's going to push the ideal of human self-sufficiency as far as it can go. He has one thing going for him, his incredible soldiership. I mean, it really is the premise of the whole historical fact. And Plutarch's biography and Shakespeare's story that, again, when this man fought for Rome, Rome won. When he fought for the Volsces won. How could you come closer to the ideal of being that unique man that makes the difference? Hence, Shakespeare develops Aristotle's formula that a man without a city is either a beast or a god in this play. And a lot of people feel that he's doing that deliberately with Aristotle's phrase in mind. So, on the one hand, Coriolanus becomes a dragon. That's a beast. And you see that in a whole series of references, page 96. So this would be Act 4, Scene 1, about line 30 in his own formulation. Like to a lonely dragon that his fen makes feared and talked of more than seen, your son will or exceed the common or be caught with cautelous baits and practices. He does both, as it turns out. But his self-conception is as a lonely dragon, and that's the way other people start to think of him. Page 121. This is Act 4, Scene 7, about line 23. Fights dragon-like, Phidias says of him, and does achieve as soon as draw his sword. And then in the most telling of the references on page 139, this is Act 5, Scene 4. Menenius says of him, this is Act 5, Scene 4, about line 12. This Marcius is grown from man to dragon. He has wings, he's more than a creeping thing. So there is some sense of the beast to Coriolanus. There is something very inhuman about this soldier, the way he turns on his own people. And there isn't, if you don't need your own people, there's something inhuman about him. There would have to be, in a way, something subhuman, dragon-like. And of course, throughout the play, as in Homer, the heroes are compared to savage animals, like to lions. There's this very strong sense in the play that there's something savage about these great soldiers. But if you look down, if you're still on page 139, we see an interesting modulation here, starting with Menenius' speech at line 16. So did he me, he no more remembers his mother now than an 8-year-old horse. See, this is very Aristotelian. He's cut himself off for humanity. He's a beast. The tartness of his face sours ripe grapes. When he walks, he moves like an engine, and the ground shrinks before his treading. He is able to pierce a corselet with his eye, talks like a nail, and his hum is a battery. Now he's truly inhuman. He's a machine. He is indeed a killing machine. He sits in a state as a thing made for Alexander, as if he's a statue of Alexander. That's a bit of an anachronism there, but let's not worry about it. What he bids be done is finished with his bidding. He wants nothing of a god but eternity and a heaven to throne in. There's the modulation from the beast to the god in one speech there. I think it's good evidence that maybe Shakespeare really had this statement of Aristotle's in mind. Because at the same time, as we picture Coriolanus as a beast in this play, he's also frequently imaged as a god. And that's really, the question that his whole career raises. He seems inhuman to us, especially turning on his own people this way. And yet, what does that show? Does it show that he's a beast and somehow lesser? Or is he someone who's passed to a higher order and now is above ordinary things? And so there's a lot of imagery in the play that also compares him to a god. Even before he turns on Rome, if you look at page 45, for example, so this is Act 2, Scene 1, when the tribunes are describing this reaction, how everybody's come out to see him. Think of this as you start Julius Caesar next time, because Julius Caesar will get a similar reception in Rome, and with tribunes complaining about it. But pick up at line 224 on page 45. Such a father as if that whatsoever God who leads him were slyly crept into his human powers and gave him gracious posture. This is a very worrisome aspect of the Roman system, that the ordinary people may actually regard one of these great soldiers as a god. Now, again, I want you to understand, this was, in a certain sense, a real possibility. We are used to monotheistic religions now, to a single God who transcends the natural world. In Judaism and Christianity and Islam, the gulf between divinity and humanity is absolutely unbridgeable, with one exception in Christianity. But that was in the other direction, God becoming man. The idea of man becoming God is really deeply foreign to our religious sensibilities in the modern world. It was not in the ancient world. The Roman emperors actually became gods. Julius Caesar was deified officially by the Senate. Augustus Caesar was, well, the very name shows it, was deified by the Roman Senate. The Roman emperors were pictured as gods on Roman currency. Again, it's, we want to say they weren't really gods. I remember, how many of you have been to the Parthenon? How many of you have been to the one in Memphis? Excuse me, in Nashville? That's the real one. There's this total wreck over in Athens. But if you want to see the real Parthenon, it's in Nashville, Tennessee. And it's even got a finished basement. And they've got the famous statue of Athena there. I think the gold and ivory may be fake, but I remember I actually went to this thing, and I'm only half joking when I say in some ways you'll get a better feel for the Parthenon going to Nashville, because the thing's complete. It's actually very impressive in the interior. And there's the 45-foot statue of Athena, and I was staring at it, and this little kid tugged me and said, "She's not real." And he really was frightened that I was being taken in by the pagan aura. I was really touched, because it showed, I'm guessing his Christianity meant so much to him that he wanted to point out this paganism to him, that, there aren't gods like that. There's one God, true God, up in heaven. Well, the ancient world, they had lots of gods, and so it wasn't such a big deal if some human became a god. It didn't seem so improbable. You got 1,000 gods, what's 1,001? And so there are certainly, in Homer, in much Greek mythology, the line between human and divine is easily crossed. Gods have sex with moral human beings and produce demigods, the heroes, and so on. So, in a certain sense, you'll see this very strongly in Julius Caesar and Antony Cleopatra. The possibility of a human being becoming a god is not remote in this world. It's one thing that makes it a pagan world, and it's a great fear in Roman politics here. This could upset the whole republic if now the people started whoring after this false god of Coriolanus. So that's why this language comes up again and again of him. Page 47. This is Act 2, Scene 1, about line 269. I've seen the dumb men throng to see him and the blind to hear him speak. Matrons flung gloves, ladies and maids their scarves and handkerchiefs. He's like a rock star. Upon him as he passed, the nobles bended as to Jove's statue, and the commons made a shower and thunder with their caps and shouts. I never saw the like. By the way, yeah, if you take a rock star and a great athlete, you have some sense of what a man like Coriolanus appeared like in the ancient world. Again, the notion that they're somehow of a higher order. Just a few more examples. Page 70. This is what troubles the tribunes, Act 3, Scene 1, line 80. Brutus says to Coriolanus, you speak of the people as if you were God to punish, not a man of their infirmity. Finally, on page 117, Cominius now says of the Volscis, this is Act 4, Scene 6, about line 90, if he is their God, he leads them like a thing made by some other deity than nature that shapes man better, and they follow him against us brats with no less confidence than boys pursuing summer butterflies or butchers killing flies. And we know from page 18 what boys like pursuing butterflies are like in this world. So it's raised as a real possibility in the eyes of the characters of the play that this man has become a god. And it really is that Aristotelian point. Here's the greatest human hero, and has he somehow transcended the human condition, or has he sunk below it? And again, you see all of his tragedy in this fact. The city is basically a world of the middle, of middle humanity, of the middle range of humanity. The city is the world of compromise. It's where people temperately proceed to things, where they're not supposed to go to extremes. There's a lot of language in the play to that respect, in that regard. If you look at page 74, for example, Act 3, Scene 1, line 180, on both sides more respect. Or page 76, Act 3, Scene 1, again, Menenius says, 217, and temperately proceed to what you would thus violently redress. That the city is defined by the middle here of people compromising. When in some ways the city most fears is uncompromising people like Coriolanus. Again, you see, if you will, the tragic dialectic here. The city wants these great heroes. It wants a god to lead them. But once, beware of what you wish for in the ancient world. Because if you get that god, he's going to be very difficult to manage. So there's a kind of tension between greatness and mediocrity in the city. The city is defined in a way by those interchanges between Menenius and Sicinius and Brutus, where they would be able to achieve compromise. They would be able to make the city function on the level of ordinary human desires. What goes haywire in the city is when you get a character like Coriolanus, who actually does what the city wants from him. They want a god. They want an extraordinary soldier who is unlimited in his greatness. And yet when they get it, they are really worried about having it. Okay, let me pause here and see if any questions. Yes?
I guess I've got one that I'd like to point to primarily. How does Aristotle distinguish between this political animal as he defined it,
Yeah.
the city, but also the one that we can do without the city and becomes distinct from an animal and becomes a beast or a god? How is that distinction?
You mean what's the distinction between beast and animal there? Yeah, I think the word beast there is something like theria. It is a Greek word for really savage animal. So it's not, I don't know enough. Yeah, I see what you mean. Let me say, I don't know enough ancient Greek to make this point, but I'm kidding. That zoon is a very general word for moving thing, a thing that moves of its own motion. And that's an animal. I believe the word there is theria, but I'm not sure. It's a word that means a ferocious beast. So that would be the distinction. And especially now, once you've defined man as the political animal, you're talking about a being that would either be defective or superior in relation to that. Okay?
Which also approximates God and putting them all in kind of this close, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, you can say that the whole problem is the God becomes indistinguishable from a beast when this being leaves the human orbit of the city. I mean, this is what Oedipus is all about, by the way, and why Oedipus is imaged as a beast, but also as a god in Sophocles' play. And this whole, I think the whole of the Oedipus Tyrannus can be worked out in terms of Aristotle in just those terms. It's a very similar idea. And, you know, Oedipus is so puzzling and so tragic for just this reason. Is this guy above us for what he did, or is he horribly below us? And the answer is both in the play. And, yeah.
And I guess I've got one other. Is the I just don't have a good knowledge of history. I guess. Is this Brutus meant to be Lucius Junius Brutus or the later Brutus?
No, this is a plebeian. So the fact is, the name Brutus comes from Plutarch, so Shakespeare used it. But this is not of the Brutus family. It's not the Brutus, Lucius Junius Brutus, who expelled the Tarquins, and he's now related to Marcus Brutus. It's just a kind of accident that he's named Brutus. But it is interesting. It's a little, if it weren't, it's so it's so funny. Plutarch says that, you know, there were 5 tribunes, and he gives 2 names, and so Shakespeare has only the 2 names, and he uses them. But anyway, other questions? Okay, now let's look at the turn in Coriolanus in light of all this. I mean, in some ways, you can see how problematic his quest is. Human beings are not self-sufficient. But let me just say, if you learn nothing else in this course, never say you're the author of yourself to your mother. It's intellectually and emotionally inadequate. And of course, that's what happens, and in some ways it's so simple. But it's really, if you look at the speeches starting around 130, page 132, you can see why Coriolanus is forced to yield, because he's trying to maintain an impossible human position here. And it's very evident from his first words on the top of page 132, Act 5, Scene 3. My wife comes foremost, then the honored mold wherein this trunk was framed. This is the beginning of a speech that ends as if a man were author himself. I mean, that's what his mother is, the mold whereon he was framed. And she brings up her womb many times in this sequence of speeches here. And you see here that he simply cannot maintain his position as a god here, faced with his family. I melt and am not of stronger earth than others. My mother bows as if Olympus to a molehill, should in supplication nod. And so indeed, in some ways, he's lost at the very beginning here. And Volumnia knows to play upon this, that here is his family. And it touches him on many levels. On the one hand, I mean, in a sense, this whole sequence is about generation here. Eros. And it's not just that he's generated from his mother, but his son is there. Generated from Coriolanus through Virgilia. What we have here is, the Roman family in its purpose of harnessing Eros, the power of generation, sexual generation, to provide the city with citizens. And yet it turns out, it's very lucky for Rome that it did not fully absorb the family. Remember I said one of the characteristics of the Republic is that institutions or forces that we normally think of as independent of politics, like religion and the family, tend to be absorbed into the orbit of the city in this world, but not fully. Rome fails in its embassies to Coriolanus. They send his best friend and chief negotiator Menenius. They send Cominius. All these official representatives of the Roman polis fail. but the family succeeds because Coriolanus has an attachment to his family, it turns out, that is deeper than his attachment to the city, independent of it, that he keeps imaging as natural here, that this is natural affection. And again, it has many ramifications. For example, what we see here is the importance of his name. Volumnia points out to him the self-destructive nature of his enterprise, that if he destroys Rome, he will destroy the only basis of his fame. And again, it is one of the great ironies. His name is now Coriolanus. And as he's about to learn, that name is not going to get him much honor among the Volscians. So he's, in a way, his quest for immortality is tied to Rome here. And he learns if he destroys Rome, he has destroyed himself. Moreover, you have the whole sense here of his family as a line. That it's very important that he has this son, Marcius. And Marcius has said, I'll run away till I'm older and then I'll fight. In a way, what Volumnia brings out here is the self-contradictory nature of his enterprise here, that he is, when all is said, still a human being, and that means a citizen of his country, the child of his mother, the husband of his wife, the father of his son. What comes out here is all the many ways in which he, a la Aristotle, is integrated into a community, and that he cannot stand as if a man were author himself and knew no other kin. And again, it's obviously very strong here that it is his mother who's presenting him with these facts, and as her last trump card at the end on page 137. So Act 5, Scene 3, about line 177. Come, let us go. This fellow had a Volscian to his mother. His wife is in Coriols, and his child like him by chance. He can't accept that. He cannot live with that, even though in some ways it's his claim. He's claiming, I'm above all this. I have no human ties. I don't need them. And, it's hard to say, how to react to this. There's a very strange thing in Jonathan Swift, somewhere in his notebooks, where he talks about lists of contemptible actions. And one of the things he lists is Coriolanus yielding to his mother. And, I did a double take the first time I saw that, because it's very hard for us not to see this as a very human moment. And most critics talk about Coriolanus reclaiming his humanity here, but I guess Swift felt, no, to be a really extraordinary person would not have let these normal common affections affect him. I think Shakespeare is showing here that it is indeed very problematic to step outside of all human ties and be self-sufficient. You would either have to be a beast or a god, a dragon or a god, in the terms of this play. And so instead, Coriolanus says, I melt. And again, it's very interesting. That's still on page 132 there, that line 28, I melt. One thing you might look for in this play, and especially Antony and Cleopatra as its companion piece, there's a lot of images in both plays of hard things and melting things. And hard things are thumos and melting things are eros. Coriolanus is obsessed with solid things. They reflect his sense of his own solid identity, separate from other human beings. But even he, in the end, melts. You'll see in Antony and Cleopatra, people are melting all the time because they're so erotic and kind of melting into each other. So I think this play, it is, in a very Aristotelian sense, an attempt to define the human condition as that middle condition between God and beast, where people have to yield to fit into the community and in which they can't be absolute. And yet it reminds us of the fact that in some ways we want absolutes, that the hero is the man of absolutes, the unyielding man, and that's what makes this tragic then. Coriolanus himself says that this yielding to his mother will be most mortal to him, and indeed it turns out to be that way when he goes back to the Volskis. So I think this play in some ways distills in its clearest Shakespeare's sense of what the relation of the hero to the ordinary community is. The ordinary community functions, it can live, it can generate its future, it yields, it is human beings in their mediocrity, in their middle state, coming together. And yet, when you look at a Coriolanus, you say, there's really something quite extraordinary about this man and his unwillingness to do this, even though in the end, even he melts and has to give in to the community. But that tension goes to the heart of tragedy in Shakespeare, that the hero doesn't fit into the ordinary community, and that says something about the hero. There's something peculiar and peculiarly uncompromising about it. But it also says something about the ordinary community, that in a way it is too yielding and too compromising and cannot produce great individuals according to its vision. Now, any questions about that? Yes?
So if you tie together what you just said about the Roman family with your earlier comment about Plutarch considering the Greeks superior to the Romans, wouldn't one way in which the latter is true be Greek homosexuality, in the sense that these great Greek figures were more capable of becoming gods because either they didn't have children, they didn't very much care about children, think about Achilles or Alexander
Yeah.
or Socrates or Plato. They either didn't have children or didn't care for them, didn't have wives or didn't care for them, were preoccupied with men. So wouldn't that be a way in which they were more capable of transcending the human condition and becoming gods?
Yeah, but there's a lot of homosexuality among Roman emperors, so I don't. I don't know if there's that strong a distinction between Greeks and Romans in that respect. You know, I didn't dwell on it, but those speeches when Cominius and Coriolanus talk about having more joy in greeting each other on the battlefield than when they met their wives, and Ophidius does the same thing. That seems to point in the direction of homosexuality along the lines of the Iliad and Patroclus and Achilles. So I'm not sure.
Even a distinction between Coriolanus and, say, Achilles or Socrates or Plato or Alexander.
Well, between Coriolanus and Alcibiades, it would really work that way. And then, I mean, you could probably make some connection then between homosexuality and philosophy, as if going in this unconventional direction. But I don't know that interests Shakespeare in this play. But again, I'm not sure that that's an issue on which you can distinguish the Greeks and Romans from what I've read about Emperor Hadrian and so on. Other questions? Okay, let me finish up now in a way that will take us on to Julius Caesar. That is, this play is a tragedy, and in a way, things look catastrophic. Rome was almost destroyed. It expels its greatest soldier in the process. How many of you would bet money on the Roman Republic after reading this play? I mean, you would think, I'll give him 10, 15 years after this. And Coriolanus more or less says that. You expel me and you'll be exposed to every possible danger. And yes, the Republic will fall 450 years later. And this is a defective regime. Shakespeare has shown many problems with the Roman regime. But how is it that Coriolanus proved to be such a bad prophet that the regime that he said was so defective managed to last 450 years, and not just creep along for 450 years, but conquer the rest of the Mediterranean world in the process? Well, the answer is that Coriolanus, in a weird way, secured the future of the very regime he despised and said would fall. And I'd like to suggest that Rome actually learns lessons from this story. Shakespeare doesn't spell them out, and if we didn't have the rest of Roman history, it would be hard to prove this from the play. But let me just say what I think the plebeians and the patricians learned from this story. because it did not repeat itself. The plebeians learn caution and moderation. They have come very close to getting their city destroyed. Yeah, they exercised their power and they showed the patricians who they are, and they taught this guy Coriolanus a lesson. But they are scared within an inch of their lives, and we see them turning on the tribunes. And indeed, now again, I'm forced to infer this from the play, but also from Roman history and Machiavelli. That is, the plebeians learn, yeah, they have power, but they better be more careful in the way they use it. And they learn, maybe we need some of these patricians, and maybe we shouldn't be too eager to banish them. And indeed, it is true, and Machiavelli does point this out, that there were very few incidents like this in Roman history, where one of the great leaders of the city got banished. And many of them did very strange things, very dangerous things. And I can't prove this, but I think you can say that this story teaches the plebeians a lesson. And of course, at the same time, it teaches the patricians a lesson. That they see what happens when a patrician is too openly contemptuous of the plebeians, when he refuses to act a part in public. There's a lot of language of acting in this play, you might have noticed, where Coriolanus says, like a dull actor, I forgot my part, or his reluctance to act, to put on a show for the plebeians, proves disastrous for him, nearly disastrous for the patrician party, nearly disastrous for the patricians. And again, I'm inferring this, but you can bet that the patricians learned a lesson here too. And again, it's a lesson of caution and moderation. It's the lesson that Volumnia tries to teach Coriolanus, that you should hide your contempt for the common people. You should wait until you're in office before manifesting any of it. In other words, you can see why this story became a kind of parable for Rome of what not to do, and why both parties might have learned this lesson, the patricians and the plebeians. And again, the fact that this Roman Republic survives another 450 years shows that they learned something of this. Now, the regime changed. We talked about how after about 150 years, plebeians became eligible for consul, and things kept changing. But still, the basic outline of this regime with the Senate, the consuls, and the tribunes lasts into Julius Caesar's day. And one reason it does seem to last is this story, which teaches Rome indeed temporarily proceed to what you might would moderately redress. We see the difference among the Volscis, who don't have tribunes and don't have these institutions, and all they do is kill Coriolanus. For them, it really proves disastrous. Not much longer after this, the Romans effectively wiped them out. So, in that sense, the whole story of Coriolanus truly is the founding of the Roman Republic. We do see the introduction of the tribunate as this distinctively popular institution in the regime, but in some ways the whole story is the founding story, because it teaches a lesson to the two parties in Rome that they have to live with each other in a way, have to moderate their demands and find ways of compromising, which Rome did for hundreds of years. And indeed, Rome went on to conquer so much. But on the other hand, you can see the danger here, the ultimate Achilles heel of the regime. And oddly enough, it turns out to be too much attachment of the people to one of the great patrician heroes. In Act 2, it's looking as if Coriolanus, if he plays his cards right, could emerge as the sole ruler in Rome. The patricians are on his side. and now the plebeians are flocking to him like a god. He blows it completely. He just can't act a part even for a minute to get what he wants. But you can see the danger here is if one of these patricians would wise up and learn to act in public, to put on a show for the people. Did we see here what the people want? I'm sure you know this formula. They want bread and circuses. They want food, and there's already talk about, placating the people by giving them food, and they want a show. They want the patricians to perform for them. Well, that turns out to be the formula for Julius Caesar. That's why he put this system to rest, why he beat the game. He turns out to be the patrician who was willing to give the plebeians what they wanted, and so they make a god out of him. They make a Caesar out of him. And that's what we'll be looking at in Julius Caesar. So as you read the play, particularly look at the opening scene of Julius Caesar. It's very similar to the opening scene of Coriolanus. There are plebeians, there are tribunes, and yet the interplay is so different, and you will learn so much of how Rome has changed between the earliest days of the Republic and the last dying days of the Republic. And think about Brutus and Mark Antony and their speeches to the Roman plebeians, how the treatment of the plebeians has changed at this point where the Republic is about to collapse into an empire. So we will enjoy the Roman Republic while it's ruling the world. We're going to see the Republic start to fall next week in Julius Caesar. And again, I'm going to get together with my TFs right now, and we'll try to start the process of getting the sections in place for starting next week.